Hello everyone and welcome to my B&B CBS Gossip 24 channel. Katie's secret struggle, Brooke questions Ridge. Katie Spencer will have a secret struggle while Brooke Logan Forrester has some tough questions for Ridge Forrester. Now that Bill Spencer has offered Katie a new fashion house, she's feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. However, Katie will face the reality of the situation on Wednesday's B&B episode and wonder if she can really do this. Katie will have concerns about totally pivoting her career and will no doubt worry about the reactions at Forrester Creations. Since Katie hasn't made a firm decision about her future yet, it'll definitely be on her mind as she interacts with key players at the Forrester office. Katie will indeed head into work and most likely clash with Ridge while she's there. It looks like Katie and Ridge will have a tense discussion that reminds her of exactly why she feels undervalued at Forrester Creations. Katie is talented and has the potential to accomplish so much more, so Ridge should inadvertently give her a nudge toward turning in her resignation. It won't happen just yet, but Katie may be leaning in that direction after Ridge's lack of appreciation. Brooke could end up in the middle of Ridge and Katie's friction on Wednesday's show. Although Brooke will probably try to settle things down, Katie may feel like her sister is taking Ridge's side and perhaps always will. That could add to Katie's motivation to walk away from Forrester, but she'll have some final reservations to work through in the next couple episodes. As for Ridge, he'll face Brooke's interrogation soon enough. Brooke will have some difficult questions for Ridge regarding Katie and the role she plays at Forrester Creations, so she may privately quiz him about whether her sister's right about feeling cast aside. The Forresters take priority over the Logans in their family business, so that could certainly affect Katie's upcoming choice to move forward with Bill's fashion house plans. Katie's secret struggle unfolds as a deeply layered emotional and professional crossroads that quietly but powerfully defines her arc in this script, positioning her internal conflict against the familiar yet increasingly suffocating backdrop of Forrester Creations, where history, loyalty, and hierarchy have always mattered more than fairness, and where Katie Spencer has spent far too long convincing herself that patience and gratitude should outweigh recognition and ambition, especially now that Bill Spencer's offer of a brand new fashion house arrives like both a lifeline and a storm, stirring gratitude, fear, hope, and doubt all at once. Because while the opportunity represents validation of her talent and a chance to finally step into her own authority, it also demands a complete pivot away from the life, routines, and fragile sense of belonging she has built within the Forrester walls, making Wednesday's episode a pivotal moment where Katie is forced to confront the reality of whether she truly believes she deserves more or whether she will once again settle for being overlooked. And this tension follows her straight into the Forrester office, where every interaction feels heavier because she has not yet made a decision and therefore sees everything through a lens of uncertainty and emotional vulnerability, particularly when she clashes with Ridge Forrester, whose dismissive or unintentional lack of appreciation becomes the catalyst that crystallizes all the resentment Katie has tried to suppress for years, reminding her of countless moments where her ideas, loyalty, and contributions were quietly absorbed into the larger Forrester legacy without acknowledgement, and Ridge, perhaps not meaning to wound her but acting from a place of entitlement shaped by generations of privilege, inadvertently reinforces the very belief that Katie has been trying not to accept, that no matter how talented or dedicated she is, she will always come second to the Forresters in their own family business. A realization that stings even more because Katie knows she is capable of so much more and has proven it time and time again, making Ridge's attitude less of an isolated offense and more of a symbolic representation of everything that has held her back, nudging her closer to the idea of resignation even if she is not yet ready to take that final step. And into this already volatile situation steps Brooke Logan Forrester, who finds herself caught in the middle of a dynamic that tests her loyalty, her marriage, and her role as a sister. Because while Brooke likely attempts to smooth over the tension between Ridge and Katie, her instinctive defense of Ridge, or even her inability to fully challenge him, may only deepen Katie's sense of isolation, feeding the painful belief that Brooke will always prioritize Ridge and the Forrester name over her own sister, no matter how justified Katie's feelings are, and this perceived betrayal adds another layer to Katie's struggle, transforming her professional dilemma into a deeply personal reckoning about where she truly belongs and whether staying at Forrester Creations means continuing to diminish herself for the sake of family harmony. While Brooke's growing unease does not go unnoticed, prompting her to later interrogate Ridge privately with difficult questions about Katie's role at the company and whether he has truly considered how undervalued she feels, forcing Ridge to confront the uncomfortable possibility that his behavior and the company culture he embodies may be driving away someone who has given far more than she has ever received in return, and this interrogation serves as a subtle but important counterbalance, highlighting that while the Forresters may take priority in their family business, that hierarchy comes at a cost, one that may soon include losing Katie altogether, especially as Bill's offer looms larger in her mind as a tangible alternative where she would not be a supporting player but the central force, the respected leader, the visionary whose voice matters, even though accepting it would mean stepping into the unknown and risking failure on her own terms rather than enduring stagnation under someone else's shadow. And as Katie wrestles with these final reservations over the next few episodes, the audience is invited to witness not just a career decision but a profound evolution of self-worth, as she weighs fear against fulfillment, loyalty against self-respect and familiarity against possibility, making her struggle resonate far beyond the confines of fashion houses and family feuds, because at its core this storyline is about a woman finally asking herself whether staying silent is worth the cost of being unseen, and whether walking away, even from something she once loved, is the bravest choice she can make. Katie's internal battle deepens in ways that quietly but profoundly reshape her perspective, because once the initial shock of Bill's offer settles, it becomes impossible for her to ignore how different she feels when she imagines a future that does not revolve around Forrester creations. And that realization alone is both intoxicating and terrifying, since it forces her to acknowledge just how much of her identity has been tied to a place where she has never truly felt secure, respected, or prioritized. And as she moves through her workday in the aftermath of the tense interaction with Ridge, every hallway, meeting room and familiar face becomes a reminder of how long she has existed on the margins of a company that relies on her competence but rarely celebrates her contributions, making even routine tasks feel emotionally loaded as she wonders whether this environment is capable of changing or whether she has simply been waiting for validation that will never come. And while Katie has always prided herself on being level-headed and pragmatic, the weight of this decision introduces a vulnerability that leaves her questioning her instincts, her courage, and even her worth, because choosing Bill's fashion house would mean stepping into a role where success or failure would be hers alone, without the safety net of an established brand or the comfort of familiar structures. Yet staying at Forrester Creations increasingly feels like choosing emotional stagnation over growth, especially as Ridge's behavior lingers in her mind, not just as a single hurtful moment but as confirmation of a long-standing pattern in which her ideas are filtered through Forrester authority and her value is measured only in how well she supports someone else's vision. And this growing awareness makes it harder for Katie to accept Brooke's attempts to downplay the situation, because while Brooke may genuinely want peace, her inability to fully validate Katie's frustration reinforces the painful truth that Brooke's world has always been centered around Ridge and the Forrester legacy, leaving Katie to grapple with the realization that her sister may never fully see her struggle in the way she needs. And this emotional distance complicates their relationship as Katie begins to guard her thoughts more carefully, knowing that expressing doubt or resentment risks being dismissed as overreaction rather than acknowledged as the culmination of years of quiet compromise. And meanwhile Bill's presence, whether directly or indirectly, becomes a steady reminder of an alternative path that values Katie not as an accessory to someone else's success but as the driving force behind a new venture. And although Bill's motivations may be layered with his own history and desire to prove himself supportive, the fact remains that he sees Katie's potential clearly and unapologetically, offering her not just a job but a platform, and that clarity contrasts sharply with the ambiguity she experiences at Forrester, where her future always seems conditional on someone else's approval, making it increasingly difficult for her to ignore the sense that accepting Bill's offer could be an act of self-respect rather than betrayal. Yet despite this growing resolve, Katie is not immune to doubt, because the idea of walking away from Forrester Creations also means severing ties to a place that has been intertwined with her personal life, her family, and her sense of stability for years, and she cannot help but worry about the fallout. How Ridge will react, how Brooke will justify it, how the Forresters will frame her departure, and whether she will be painted as disloyal or ungrateful for daring to choose herself. And these fears resurface as Brooke eventually circles back to the issue, gently probing Katie about her plans while clearly hoping for reassurance that nothing is about to change. But instead of offering comfort, the conversation exposes how differently they view loyalty and sacrifice as Katie admits, perhaps for the first time out loud, that she is tired of being the one who adapts, who waits, who understands, and Brooke, caught between empathy and defensiveness, struggles to respond in a way that does not minimize that exhaustion, inadvertently pushing Katie further toward the conclusion that she cannot rely on her sister to advocate for her in spaces where it truly matters. And this realization carries over into Brooke's subsequent interrogation of Ridge, where she presses him on whether he has genuinely considered Katie's role and feelings or whether he has simply assumed that she will always stay put, grateful for whatever scraps of authority she is given. And Ridge's responses, whether evasive or well-intentioned but tone-deaf, reveal just how deeply ingrained the Forrester hierarchy is, as he speaks of family legacy and tradition without fully acknowledging how those ideals consistently leave non-Forresters like Katie on the outside looking in, forcing Brooke to confront the uncomfortable truth that even she has benefited from a system that sidelines her own sister. And while Brooke may leave that conversation unsettled, Katie remains the one who must live with its consequences, as she begins to imagine what it would feel like to hand in her resignation, to clear her desk, to step out of a space where she has so often felt invisible. And though the thought initially fills her with anxiety, it also brings a surprising sense of relief, as if the mere act of considering departure allows her to breathe more freely. And this emotional shift becomes harder to ignore when she catches herself speaking more confidently about ideas, more openly about her ambitions, no longer shrinking them to fit the expectations of others. And even though she has not yet made a final decision, her posture, her tone, and her willingness to challenge Ridge in subtle ways suggest that something fundamental has changed, because she is no longer willing to internalize dismissiveness as something she deserves. And this evolution does not go unnoticed by those around her, particularly Ridge, who may begin to sense that his authority over Katie is slipping, prompting either defensiveness or belated reflection. And as the episodes progress, the tension builds not through explosive confrontations but through quiet moments of reckoning, where Katie weighs late-night doubts against early-morning clarity, where she considers what kind of example she wants to set for herself and for others who have felt similarly sidelined, and where she recognizes that staying out of fear is its own kind of failure, making Bill's fashion house less of a risky leap and more of an overdue step forward. And by the time she reaches the point of making a choice, the audience understands that this is not about choosing Bill over Ridge or independence over family, but about choosing authenticity over complacency, growth over comfort, and self-worth over the illusion of belonging, setting the stage for a decision that, regardless of its immediate outcome, permanently alters Katie's trajectory and challenges the power dynamics at Forrester Creations. Because once someone who has always been reliable begins to question her place, it exposes cracks in the foundation that can no longer be ignored. As the days continue to pass and the weight of Katie's decision presses more insistently against her thoughts, the atmosphere at Forrester Creations subtly but unmistakably shifts, because even though nothing has been formally announced, there is an unspoken tension that follows her through the halls, a sense that something foundational is changing beneath the polished surfaces and familiar routines. And Katie herself feels this shift most acutely in moments of quiet, when she catches her reflection in the glass walls of the office and barely recognizes the woman staring back at her, not because she looks different, but because she feels different, more awake, more aware, and less willing to smooth over discomfort for the sake of keeping the peace. And this growing self-awareness makes her increasingly sensitive to the small slights and assumptions that once rolled off her shoulders, such as Ridge casually redirecting a conversation without acknowledging her input, or colleagues instinctively deferring to Forrester opinions even when Katie's expertise is clearly relevant. And rather than internalizing these moments as personal failings, she begins to see them as symptoms of a culture that has never truly made room for her leadership, which in turn fuels her determination to stop waiting for permission to step fully into her potential, even as fear continues to whisper doubts about whether she is strong enough to succeed on her own. And those doubts intensify when she thinks about the practical realities of Bill's fashion house, the immense responsibility, the financial risks, the scrutiny that will inevitably come with being at the helm of a new venture tied to a powerful name, and the possibility that failure would be far more visible and painful than quietly remaining undervalued at Forrester. Yet despite these anxieties, there is also a growing sense of excitement that, she cannot suppress. A spark that ignites whenever she imagines building something from the ground up, setting the tone, shaping the culture, and proving not only to others but to herself that she is capable of leading with confidence and vision. And this internal tug-of-war manifests in her interactions with Brooke, whose concern becomes more pronounced as she senses Katie pulling away emotionally, prompting attempts at reassurance that often fall short because they focus on preserving the status quo rather than addressing the root of Katie's dissatisfaction. And while Brooke insists that Ridge means well and that family businesses are inherently complicated, Katie finds herself increasingly unwilling to accept good intentions as a substitute for meaningful change, especially when she reflects on how often she has been asked to be patient, understanding, and forgiving without seeing those qualities reciprocated in tangible ways. And this frustration eventually spills over into a candid conversation between the sisters, where years of unspoken resentment rise to the surface. Not in anger but in quiet honesty, as Katie admits that she is exhausted from constantly adjusting her expectations to accommodate Forrester priorities. And Brooke, confronted with the depth of her sister's pain, struggles to reconcile her desire to defend Ridge with the undeniable truth that Katie's feelings are valid, leading to a moment of uncomfortable silence that underscores how deeply entrenched these dynamics have become. And although Brooke may promise to do better, to advocate more strongly, Katie senses that real change would require a fundamental shift in loyalties that Brooke may never be willing to make, reinforcing the idea that waiting for others to champion her interests is no longer a viable strategy. And meanwhile, Ridge's perspective remains clouded by his own assumptions, as he oscillates between mild irritation at Katie's newfound assertiveness and a nagging sense of unease that he may have underestimated her, because for the first time he begins to consider the possibility that Katie leaving would not simply be an inconvenience but a genuine loss, both professionally and symbolically, signaling that Forrester Creations may no longer be the unchallenged destination it once was for top-tier talent. And this realization prompts Ridge to reflect, albeit reluctantly, on how often he has taken Katie's presence for granted, assuming her loyalty without ever truly earning it. Yet even as this awareness dawns, pride and habit make it difficult for him to articulate genuine appreciation, resulting in half measures that only further alienate Katie, who can sense when gestures are motivated by fear of losing control rather than sincere respect. And as the narrative builds toward a turning point, Bill re-enters Katie's orbit more directly, offering not pressure but clarity, as he reassures her that the decision is hers alone and that he believes in her regardless of what she chooses. A stance that surprises Katie and underscores the contrast between being valued as an equal versus being managed as a subordinate. And this support allows her to envision the fashion house not merely as Bill's project but as her own opportunity to redefine success on her terms, incorporating lessons learned from years at Forrester while intentionally avoiding the pitfalls that left her feeling diminished. And this vision becomes increasingly vivid as she begins sketching ideas, drafting plans, and mentally assembling a team that reflects collaboration rather than hierarchy. And these creative bursts feel like a release, reminding her of why she entered the fashion world in the first place. Not to serve someone else's legacy but to express innovation, creativity, and leadership. And with each step toward this imagined future, the idea of staying at Forrester Creations feels less like loyalty and more like self-betrayal, a realization that brings both clarity and grief. Because despite everything, Katie does care deeply about the people there and the history she shares with them, making the prospect of leaving bittersweet rather than triumphant. And this emotional complexity is evident when she begins preparing for the possibility of resignation, sorting through memories attached to files, offices, and routines, each one a reminder of both accomplishments and compromises. And as she approaches the moment of decision, the tension reaches a quiet crescendo, marked not by dramatic confrontations but by introspective resolve as Katie acknowledges that no outcome is without risk, but that choosing herself may finally allow her to live without the constant ache of feeling unseen. And when she eventually sits down with Ridge, whether to announce her resignation or to set firm boundaries that redefine her role, the conversation carries the weight of everything left unsaid, forcing Ridge to confront the consequences of a system that prioritizes bloodlines over merit. And regardless of how he responds, the power dynamic has irrevocably shifted, because Katie is no longer asking for validation but asserting her worth. And this assertion reverberates beyond her personal storyline, challenging Brooke to re-evaluate her own complicity, prompting Ridge to question long-held assumptions. and signaling to everyone at Forrester Creations that loyalty cannot be sustained without respect. And as the dust begins to settle, the audience is left with a sense that Katie's journey is not simply about changing jobs or starting a new company, but about reclaiming agency after years of quiet endurance, illustrating that growth often requires stepping away from what is familiar in order to finally see oneself clearly, and setting the stage for future conflicts and alliances that will test whether the characters around her can evolve alongside her or whether they will remain tethered to traditions that no longer serve the people within them, making Katie's choice, whatever form it ultimately takes, a defining moment not just for her, but for the entire ecosystem of relationships that have long depended on her willingness to stay in the background. Katie's evolving resolve begins to ripple outward. Its impact becomes increasingly evident in the subtle shifts among those who once assumed her constancy, because when someone who has always been dependable starts to step into her own power, it forces everyone around her to recalibrate their expectations. And Katie senses this in the tentative way colleagues approach her, in the cautious looks exchanged when her name comes up in meetings, and in the unspoken acknowledgement that her presence is no longer a given, and this awareness strengthens her resolve rather than weakening it, as she recognizes that her value has always been there, waiting to be acknowledged, and that the only difference now is her willingness to claim it openly. And while Brooke continues to wrestle with guilt and defensiveness in equal measure, she also begins to see her sister through a new lens, not as someone who needs protecting or placating, but as a woman capable of making bold, independent choices, a realization that brings both pride and discomfort, because it challenges Brooke's long-held role as the mediator and emotional anchor within the family, and Ridge, too, is forced into a period of introspection as the possibility of losing Katie becomes real rather than theoretical, prompting him to question whether leadership rooted in legacy alone is enough to sustain the future of Forrester Creations. And although he may struggle to articulate regret, his actions, however imperfect, begin to reflect a growing awareness that respect